I grew up close enough to the Appalachian foothills that the woods always felt normal to me, not friendly, but familiar. I knew the way the trees leaned in on old logging roads, how the air got heavier as the sun dropped, how sound died fast once you stepped off pavement. That night, I parked my car at the edge of a washed-out gravel pull-off and cut the engine. The quiet settled immediately, thick and uncomfortable. I had been driving for hours, following a road that kept narrowing until it felt more like a suggestion than a road. I did not come there on a dare or for fun. I came because I needed to see something for myself. The house sat on a ridge above the road, half hidden by trees that had been growing unchecked for decades. I had seen it once before in daylight while passing through the area, just a shape behind brush, roof sagging, porch leaning like a tired spine. Locals avoided it without saying much. Not because of stories, but because no one had reason to go there anymore. That kind of avoidance sticks with me more than rumors ever could. I stepped out of the car and the smell of wet leaves and old soil hit me. The ground was soft, and every step made a quiet tearing sound as my boots pulled free from mud and pine needles. I shut the car door carefully, trying not to let it echo. I did not know why I cared about noise. No one was supposed to be around. Still, my body moved like it expected to be watched. The walk up the hill was slow. The path was barely visible, more a flattened line through weeds and briars. Rusted pieces of metal showed up now and then in the dirt, parts of something that had been hauled up and left to rot. As I climbed, the house came into full view. It was bigger than it looked from the road. 2 stories, wide front porch, tall windows that stared out into the trees like dark eyes. The wood siding had turned gray and rough, peeling in long strips. Parts of the roof were gone, open to the sky. The porch steps were still there, but they leaned hard to the left. I tested each one with my weight before committing. They groaned, but held. The porch floor was covered in dirt, leaves, and animal droppings. A section near the center had collapsed inward, leaving a hole down into the crawl space. I stayed close to the wall and moved slowly, listening to the wood complain under my boots. The front door was gone. Only the hinges remained, rusted and stiff, one still clinging to a splintered frame. Inside, the air felt colder. The smell changed too. It was a mix of mold, old dust, and something sour that I could not place. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, catching floating particles that drifted like smoke. The floorboards inside were warped and stained. Some were black with rot, others bleached pale where water had poured in through the broken roof. The living room was mostly empty. A collapsed couch frame lay against one wall, springs exposed and twisted. The fireplace was full of debris, bricks fallen inward. Above it, a dark stain spread up the wall and across the ceiling, probably from years of rain running down the chimney. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. The house made constant noise, wood ticking as it cooled, something scurrying inside the walls, the distant sound of wind pushing through broken windows. I moved deeper into the house, careful with every step. The kitchen was to the left, separated by a doorway with no door. Old cabinets lined the walls, their doors hanging open or missing entirely. A sink sat under a window that looked out into trees so close they brushed the glass. The counter was littered with broken jars, their contents long gone, but their shapes still visible in dried rings and stains. On the floor, I saw marks that looked like they had been made by dragging something heavy across the wood. They stopped near a door that led out the back of the house. I did not open that door. The thought of stepping into the woods behind the house felt worse than staying inside. Instead, I turned back and found the stairs leading up. They were narrow and steep, with a railing that had come loose from the wall. I gripped it anyway, more for comfort than support. Each step creaked loudly. The sound felt too big in the quiet, like it was bouncing around the house and settling into corners. Halfway up, I noticed scratches on the wall. Long, uneven lines that cut through layers of old paint. They were not deep enough to be from tools. Some were higher than my head. I traced one with my light and felt my stomach tighten. I could not tell what made them, only that they were not random. They moved upward, like something had been dragged or pushed against the wall again and again. The second floor hallway was darker than the rooms below. The roof damage was worse up there, and the floor felt spongy underfoot.
I could see straight down through gaps in the boards to the room below. I kept my weight close to the walls, stepping where the boards looked thickest. Doors lined the hallway, most of them closed. The first one I opened led to a small bedroom. A metal bed frame sat against the far wall, rusted but intact. The mattress was gone, replaced by a pile of leaves and animal nesting material. The window was broken, glass scattered across the floor like dull ice. The next room was larger. It might have been a master bedroom once. A dresser stood near the wall, its drawers pulled out and dumped. Inside one drawer, I found a stack of papers stuck together by moisture. I did not touch them. The idea of disturbing anything in that house made my skin crawl. The walls in that room were covered in dark streaks that ran from ceiling to floor. Some looked like water damage, others did not. They were too narrow, too uneven, like something had brushed against the walls over and over. At the end of the hall was a door that felt heavier than the others. It stuck when I pushed it open, scraping loudly against the floor. Inside was a bathroom. The tub was filled with black water and debris. The mirror above the sink was cracked, the glass still clinging to the frame. In the reflection, my light caught my own face, pale and tense. For a moment I stood frozen, staring at myself, waiting for something to move behind me. Nothing did. That was when I heard a sound from below. Not a voice, not footsteps. It was the slow, steady creak of wood bending under weight. Something was moving through the house. My first thought was animals, maybe a raccoon or something larger. But the sound was wrong. It was too heavy, too deliberate. It moved from one room to another, boards groaning in a pattern that felt intentional. I backed away from the bathroom and returned to the hallway. The stairs were still there, but the noise was closer now. My breathing got shallow. I told myself to stay calm, to move slowly, to not panic and put my foot through the floor. I made it to the stairs and started down, keeping my light aimed ahead. Halfway down, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I stood there, frozen, listening so hard my ears rang. Then the sound started again, closer to the base of the stairs. I did not see anything, but I could feel it, the way you feel someone standing near you without seeing them. I turned and ran uncounted. The stairs screamed under my weight, but they held. I hit the bottom and sprinted through the living room, nearly slipping on debris. I burst onto the porch and felt the night air hit my face like cold water. Behind me, the house settled, wood popping and groaning like it was breathing out. I ran down the hill, branches tearing at my clothes, my light bouncing wildly. I did not stop until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them once. When the engine finally turned over, I did not look back at the house. It drove until the road widened and the trees pulled away, until I could breathe again. I did not call the police. I did not tell anyone what I heard inside that house. I knew what it was. Someone had been living there. Not recently, maybe not even at the time I was inside, but enough signs were there. The dragged marks, the heavy steps, the way the house felt occupied instead of abandoned.
People disappear into places like that all the time, especially in the mountains, especially where no one goes looking.
Weeks later, I checked local records. The house had belonged to a family that left suddenly decades ago. No sayings, no explanation, just gone. It made sense in a way I did not like. I never went back. I never wanted to prove anything or look for answers.
The mountains keep what they want, and some houses are empty only in the daylight. At night, they remember everything that ever stayed inside them. I had been hiking alone in the southern Appalachians for most of the afternoon, following an old logging road that barely showed up on my map. The air was heavy and wet, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes every breath feel thick. The trees were tall and close together, their trunks dark with moss. Nothing moved except insects and the slow sway of leaves high above me. I had that quiet feeling you get deep in the woods where even your own footsteps sound too loud. I saw the house by accident. It sat downhill from the road, half hidden by rhododendron bushes and young trees that had grown up around it. From a distance it looked like part of the land, gray and sunken, almost melting into the slope. The roof sagged in the middle. One side of the porch had collapsed completely, leaving boards hanging down at an angle. I stopped and listened. No wind, no animals, nothing. Just that deep silence that feels like pressure on your ears. I knew I should have kept walking. People talk about places like this for a reason, but curiosity pulled harder than sense. I told myself I would just look from the outside, take a few pictures, then leave. I stepped off the road and pushed through the brush. Thorns scratched my legs through my jeans. The smell hit me before I reached the house. Old wood, damp earth, and something sour underneath it all. Up close, the house looked worse. The paint was gone, leaving bare boards that were cracked and soft. The windows were empty holes, dark inside, some still holding broken glass along the edges. The front door was missing, just an open frame leading into shadow. The porch boards groaned when I stepped on them, so I moved slow, testing each one with my foot. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled stronger, like rot and mold. Light came in through the windows in dull gray lines. The floor was covered in dirt, leaves, and animal droppings. I could see where water had come in over the years, staining the walls and buckling the floorboards. My footsteps sounded wrong in there, hollow and sharp, echoing off the bare walls. The main room was empty, except for a broken table on its side and a chair missing 2 legs. The ceiling bowed low, and I could see daylight through gaps in the roof. I stayed near the doorway at first, my heart beating faster than it should have. Every small sound made me tense. A drip of water somewhere deeper in the house sounded like footsteps when it echoed. I moved further in, slow and careful. A narrow hallway led to what used to be bedrooms. The floor dipped in places, and I stepped around dark spots where the wood looked too soft to trust. In one room, the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper with a faded flower pattern. The floor was littered with old cans, plastic wrappers, and burned wood. That was when I realized this place hadn't been empty for a long time. Someone had been here, maybe many times. The fear changed then. It wasn't just the house anymore. It was the idea of people choosing to come here. I felt watched, even though I knew it was probably just my nerves. I checked every corner with my eyes before stepping forward. In the far bedroom, I found a mattress on the floor, dark with stains, surrounded by trash. The smell there was stronger, almost making my eyes water. I backed out slowly, my skin crawling. I noticed marks on the walls as I moved back toward the hall. Scratches, deep and uneven, not from animals. They looked like they had been made by tools or heavy objects dragged along the wood. In the kitchen, the cabinets were torn open. Drawers lay smashed on the floor. Glass crunched under my boots. The sink was full of black water and leaves, and above it, the window frame was bent outward, like someone had climbed through many times. The back door was still there, barely hanging on its hinges. It opened to a steep drop down to a creek. I stood there for a moment, breathing slow, telling myself to leave. That was when I heard it. Not a voice, not footsteps. Just a soft, steady sound of something shifting weight inside the house. Wood creaked somewhere behind me, deeper than the normal settling sounds. I froze. My body went cold and tight all at once. I listened hard, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Then it happened again, closer this time. The sound of a board bending, then stopping. Someone else was in there. The thought hit me clean and sharp. This wasn't an abandoned place. It was a place someone used. I moved without thinking, stepping back into the kitchen, then toward the front room. I kept my steps light, careful not to kick debris. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. The light in the front room seemed dimmer now, like the house was closing in.
I could hear my heart pounding. As I reached the porch, I saw fresh footprints in the dirt just outside the doorway. They weren't mine. They were bigger, deeper, leading off to the side of the house and into the trees. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was, they had been close. Maybe still were. I didn't run at first. I walked fast, trying to stay quiet as I moved away from the house and back toward the road. Every snap of a twig behind me sent a shock through my body. I kept expecting to hear someone follow, to feel eyes on my back. The woods felt different now, tighter, louder. Even the insects sounded harsh. When I reached the road, I didn't stop. I kept going, my legs burning as the trail climbed. Only when the trees thinned and I could see the curve where my car was parked did I slow down. I turned around once, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The house was hidden again, swallowed by the forest.
I sat in my car for a long time before starting it, hands shaking on the wheel. The fear didn't fade right away. It stayed with me, heavy and real. On the drive down the mountain, I kept thinking about the mattress, the trash, the sounds, about how close I had been to someone who didn't want to be found.
I reported the location when I got cell service, telling them about signs of someone living there. I don't know what they found later. I didn't go back to check. I didn't need to. That house taught me something clear and lasting. Some places aren't empty just because they look that way. In the mountains, people disappear into the woods for reasons, and sometimes they leave pieces of themselves behind in places like that. I still hike. I still love the quiet and the trees. But now, when I see a structure sinking into the land, I keep my distance. I don't step onto the porch. I don't look inside. I let the forest keep its secrets, and I walk on, alive and listening, grateful I left that house when I did.
I went up there alone because that's how I always did things. I parked my car at the end of a washed-out gravel road that barely deserved to be called a road anymore. Weeds scraped the underside when I pulled in, and the trees leaned close on both sides like they were trying to block the way back out. The mountains were quiet in that heavy Appalachian way, where the quiet feels thick, like it's sitting on your shoulders. It was late afternoon, the sky dull and gray, the kind of light that makes everything look older than it is. The house sat halfway up a hill, hidden until you were almost on top of it. No driveway anymore, just two faint ruts through tall grass. The siding was gone in places, showing dark wood underneath that looked swollen and soft. The roof zagged in the middle like a tired back. One corner of the porch had collapsed, and the rest leaned forward at a bad angle. The windows were either broken or boarded up with warped planks. The boards were nailed from the inside, which I noticed right away, and that made my stomach tighten for reasons I couldn't explain yet. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. Wind moved through the trees. Somewhere downhill, water ran over rocks. There were no birds. That was the first thing that bothered me. I adjusted my backpack, checked my flashlight even though it wasn't dark yet, and walked up the hill slowly, watching where I stepped. Old glass and rusted metal hid under the grass. Up close, the house smelled wrong. Damp wood, rot, something sour underneath it all. The front door was still there, hanging crooked on one hinge. Someone had forced it open at some point, splitting the frame. I nudged it with my foot, and it swung inward with a long, low creak that echoed through the house. The sound carried deeper than it should have, like the place was hollowed out. Inside, the floor dipped under my weight. I stayed near the walls, stepping where the boards looked darker and thicker. Dust hung in the air, moving when I moved. The living room was mostly empty, except for an overturned couch with the stuffing ripped out. Mouse droppings covered the floor near the walls. A calendar still hung crooked near what used to be the doorway to the kitchen. The year on it was 1997. The pages underneath were gone, torn clean off. The walls were stained with long brown streaks where rain had gotten in. In one corner, the ceiling had collapsed, leaving a pile of wet insulation and broken boards. I could see straight up into the dark space between floors. Every sound I made came back to me louder. My breathing felt too sharp in my ears. I moved slowly from room to room. The kitchen sink was full of black water and dead bugs. The cabinets were open and empty, doors hanging loose. On the counter sat a single shoe, covered in dust, the laces still tied. That stopped me longer than anything else had so far. It didn't make sense. Everything else had been stripped or ruined, but the shoe looked like someone set it down and forgot to come back. I kept going, even though every instinct told me to turn around. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was narrow, and the floor there felt weaker. I used my flashlight now, even though daylight still leaked in through cracks and broken windows. The beam picked up scratch marks along the lower part of the walls, deep grooves in the wood, too wide to be from a small animal. Some of the marks overlapped, like whatever made them had paced back and forth. The first bedroom was empty except for a metal bed frame rusted almost in half. The mattress was gone. The floor near the window was covered in feathers and dried droppings. Something had nested there at some point. I didn't stay long. The second bedroom was worse. The door was shut, which was strange since every other door had been left open. I pushed it gently. It resisted, then gave way with a soft scraping sound. The flashlight beam landed on the walls first. Inside, the air felt heavier. They were covered in stains and handprints, smeared and overlapping, some small, some adult-sized. I couldn't tell how old they were, but they were dark and greasy looking, like oil mixed with dirt. In the corner sat a plastic bucket filled with old food cans and rags. The smell hit me then, sharp and sour, like sweat that had soaked into fabric for a long time. This room hadn't just been abandoned. Someone had stayed here, not long ago either.
The boards over the window had been nailed from the inside, and a piece of cardboard was stuffed into the gap near the floor like someone had tried to block the cold. I backed out of that room slowly, careful not to trip. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I told myself it was probably just a squatter, someone passing through, but that didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. People were unpredictable. The house felt smaller now, like it had closed in around me. I hadn't planned on going upstairs, but I noticed something near the end of the hall. A door I hadn't seen before, partly hidden behind a collapsed section of wall. It led to a narrow staircase going down, not up, a basement. The stairs were steep and uneven. I shined my light down and saw dirt at the bottom, not concrete. The smell changed as I descended. It was colder down there, damp and metallic. The walls were just stone stacked together, wet to the touch. The flashlight beam shook a little as my hands started to tremble. At the bottom, the basement opened into a wider space. Chains hung from the ceiling beams, rusted but thick, not decorative, practical. There was a workbench against one wall with old tools scattered across it. Some of them were newer than the rest, cleaned, used. A stack of empty water bottles sat nearby, along with a sleeping bag rolled tight. That was when I heard it, not a voice, just movement. A slow drag of something heavy shifting deeper in the basement. It came from behind a pile of old furniture stacked against the far wall. Frode's light locked in that direction, my breath caught halfway in. The movement stopped. The silence afterward felt worse than the sound had. He stood there, every muscle tight, listening. My ears rang, my mouth went dry. I knew then, without any doubt, that I wasn't alone.
I didn't run right away. Fear made me slow and careful. I took one step back, then another, keeping the light steady. The stairs fell too far away. The beam of my flashlight shook enough that the shadows jumped across the walls. Something scraped again, closer this time, not rushed, measured, like whoever or whatever it was knew I was there and wasn't in a hurry. That broke me. I turned and ran. I hit the stairs hard, hands scraping stone, boots slipping on damp dirt. I didn't look back. The house above felt louder now, every board popping under my feet. I burst out through the front door and didn't stop until I reached my car. I fumbled the keys, dropped them, cursed under my breath as my hands shook too much to work right. When the engine finally started, I peeled out of there, gravel spraying, heart hammering. I didn't slow down until the road smoothed out and the trees pulled back from the edges. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone exactly where it was. I drove home in silence, hands still tight on the wheel. That night, I cleaned my boots twice, even though they didn't look dirty. I threw away the clothes I wore in that house. The next week, I went back during the day, but only to the edge of the road. The house was still there, quiet as ever, but there were fresh tire tracks in the grass now, leading up the hill, not mine. I never went back up there again. I learned that some places aren't abandoned the way we like to think. Some of them are just being used by people who don't want to be seen. And sometimes the scariest thing you can find in the mountains isn't something unreal or impossible. It's the proof that someone else was watching you the whole time, deciding what to do next. I parked my car at the edge of an old logging road that hadn't been used in years. The tires crunched on loose gravel and dry leaves, and when I shut the engine off, the quiet felt heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. The Appalachian mountains rose around me in long, dark shapes, covered in thick trees that blocked most of the sky. It was late afternoon, that time when the light starts to thin out and everything turns dull and gray. I told myself I had enough daylight. I always told myself that. I had found the house a few weeks earlier while looking through old county records and satellite images. It sat alone on a ridge, far from any paved road, with no nearby neighbors and no signs of recent use. It had been built sometime in the 1930s, probably by a coal family, and abandoned decades ago when the mine shut down. From above, it looked like a simple square with a collapsed porch. Nothing special, but places like that always pull at me. I like seeing where people once lived, what they left behind, and how time slowly takes it all back. I locked my car and started walking. The road was narrow and uneven, cut deep into the hillside. Ferns brushed against my legs and spider webs stuck to my arms and hair. The air smelled like damp dirt, old leaves, and rot. Every step made noise, and each sound seemed too loud in the stillness. I kept my eyes moving, watching the tree line, listening for anything that didn't belong. After about 15 minutes, the road opened into a small clearing. The house sat at the far end, half swallowed by trees and vines. The roof sagged in the middle, and one corner had completely fallen in. The porch had collapsed and lay in a pile of broken boards and rusted nails. The paint was long gone, leaving gray wood split and soft from rain and sun. Windows were empty holes, dark and deep. It looked tired, like it had given up a long time ago. I stood there for a moment, breathing slow, letting myself adjust. My chest felt tight, the way it always does before I go inside places like this. I reminded myself that fear doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it's just the body reacting to the unknown. I stepped closer, careful where I put my feet. The ground around the house was littered with old junk. A rusted oil drum lay on its side, half sunk into the dirt. There were broken glass jars, twisted wire, and the frame of a bed with no mattress. I noticed old footprints in the dirt, not fresh but not ancient either. They looked human, worn down by rain but still there. That made me pause. The records said the place was abandoned, but records don't tell the whole truth. The front door was gone, leaving a wide opening into the house. The inside looked darker than it should have been, like the light didn't want to go in. I pulled out my flashlight, but didn't turn it on yet. I wanted to save the battery. I stepped over the fallen door frame and into the house. The floorboards creaked under my weight, soft in places, solid in others. Dust hung in the air and moved when I breathed. The smell inside was stronger, a mix of mold, old wood, and something sour that made my stomach turn. The main room was small. There was a stone fireplace on one wall, blackened from years of use. Inside it, I saw old cans, melted glass, and ash that looked newer than it should have been. Someone had used it after the house was supposed to be empty. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, yellowed and curling. In one corner there was a small table tipped on its side, and on the floor near it were scattered pills, crushed and mixed with dirt. I didn't touch them. I just looked, trying to understand what kind of person had been here. My skin prickled. This wasn't just an old family home. This place had been used recently, and not for anything good. I moved slowly into what used to be the kitchen. Cabinets hung open, their doors ripped off. The sink was full of black water and dead insects. On the counter I found burnt spoons, empty blister packs, and plastic tubing. I knew enough to recognize signs of drug use. My heart started beating faster. This was no longer just an abandoned house. This was a place people came to hide. I turned on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and showed stains on the walls and floor I hadn't noticed before. Some were dark and sticky looking. I didn't want to think too hard about what they were. I focused on where I stepped, testing each board before putting my weight down. There was a narrow hallway leading to the back of the house. As I walked down it, the air felt colder. My light caught movement on the floor. Rats scattered into cracks in the walls. I jumped and nearly lost my balance. My breath came fast and shallow. I told myself to stay calm, to stay quiet. At the end of the hallway were 2 bedrooms. The first one was mostly empty, just old clothes piled in the corner, stiff with mold. The second room made my stomach drop. There was a mattress on the floor, stained and torn. Around it were needles, food wrappers, and empty bottles. The window had been covered with a piece of plywood nailed from the inside. This wasn't some random shelter. Someone had lived here for a while. I felt watched. I knew that feeling doesn't always mean anything, but it was strong enough that my hands started to shake. I listened hard. At first, there was nothing. Then I heard it, a slow, uneven sound, like breathing, coming from somewhere beneath me. I froze. The sound came again, clearer this time. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the house, under the floor. I backed out of the room slowly, every step careful. The breathing sound followed me down the hallway, louder near the center of the house. I looked at the floor and saw a trapdoor I hadn't noticed before, its edges worn smooth. The breathing came from below it. I didn't want to believe what that meant, but my body already knew. Someone was down there, alive. I didn't open the door. I didn't move closer. I stood still, listening. The breathing turned into a cough, wet and deep. I smelled something sharp and chemical, stronger than before. My head started to ache. I realized this wasn't just a shelter.
This could be a place where dangerous things were made, or where someone was hiding because they didn't want to be found. I slowly stepped backward toward the front of the house. Every sound felt amplified. My boot brushed against a can and it rolled across the floor, echoing. The breathing stopped. That was the worst part. The silence.
The silence. I didn't wait anymore.
I turned and moved fast, not running but not slow either. I didn't want to crash through the floor or draw attention. I reached the doorway and stepped outside, gulping fresh air like I'd been underwater. My legs felt weak, but I kept moving, putting distance between me and the house.
I didn't stop until I reached my car. My hands shook as I unlocked it and got inside. I locked the doors and sat there, listening to my own breathing and the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. I watched the tree line, half expecting to see someone step out of the woods. No one did. After a few minutes, I started the engine and drove away. I didn't look back. Later that night, safe at home, I replayed everything in my head. The signs were clear now. That house wasn't abandoned, it was just hidden. People like to think danger looks obvious, but most of the time it doesn't. It looks quiet. It looks forgotten. I reported the location anonymously the next day. I didn't go back. I deleted the photos I had taken. Some places don't need to be documented. They just need to be left alone. What stayed with me wasn't the house itself, but the thought of how close I came to crossing paths with someone who didn't want to be seen. Out there in the mountains, there are still places where the law feels far away and people disappear into the woods without a trace. That house was one of those places. Now when I drive through Appalachia and see an old road cutting off into the trees, I don't feel the same pull anymore. Curiosity used to guide me. That day taught me something else matters more. Some doors are open for a reason, and some dark spaces aren't empty just because they look that way. I went alone because that's how I always do things. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, and I didn't post anything online. I parked my car at the edge of a narrow gravel road that barely showed up on my phone map, deep in the Appalachian hills. The road was eaten up by weeds, and trees leaned over it like they were tired of standing straight. The air smelled wet and old, like leaves that never fully dry. It was late afternoon, the kind of cloudy day where the light never feels strong, even before the sun starts going down. I had heard about the house from a county record map I found online. No stories, no legends, just an old property marked as vacant for decades. That made it worse in a way. No myths, no rumors, just a place people stopped going to. I grabbed my flashlight, checked my phone battery, and locked my car. The sound of the lock clicking felt louder than it should have. The walk up to the house took longer than I expected. There was no clear path, just a slope covered in wet leaves, mud, and broken branches. Every step slid a little. I kept my balance by grabbing onto tree trunks, their bark rough and damp under my fingers. The woods were quiet in a heavy way. No birds, no bugs, just the wind moving the tops of the trees. I could hear my own breathing and the soft crunch of leaves under my boots. When I finally saw the house, it didn't jump out at me. It almost blended in. The wood siding had gone gray and soft, like it was slowly turning back into dirt. Part of the roof had collapsed inward, and vines crawled up the walls, pushing through broken windows. The porch sagged in the middle, and one corner had fallen completely, leaving a pile of rotting boards and rusted nails. I stood there for a while, just looking. I always do that, letting the place settle in my head. The house felt heavy, not in a spooky way, but like it was tired of holding itself up. I could smell mold and wet wood before I even stepped onto the porch. The first step creaked but didn't break. I moved slow, testing my weight each time. The porch boards were soft, and I could see dark patches where water had soaked in for years. Leaves had piled up against the front door, which hung crooked on one hinge. It was already open a few inches, just enough to show darkness inside. I pushed the door the rest of the way with my foot. It groaned low and long, like it was fighting me. Inside, the air was colder. The smell hit harder, sharp and sour. Old rot, animal waste, and something else I couldn't place. Dust floated in the weak light coming through the windows. The living room was mostly empty. Whatever furniture had been there was long gone or broken down into pieces that didn't look like furniture anymore.
The floor dipped in the center, and parts of it were covered in a thin layer of dirt, like the house had been slowly filling back in with the outside. Wallpaper peeled off the walls in long strips, revealing dark stains underneath. I walked carefully, shining my flashlight ahead of me, watching where I stepped. There were signs of animals everywhere, droppings in corners, scratch marks along the base of the walls. I knew raccoons and possums liked places like this, and that alone made my skin tight. I didn't want to surprise anything that could bite. The kitchen was to the left. The cabinets hung open, their doors twisted and swollen from moisture. A sink full of black water sat under a cracked window. I leaned closer and saw something floating just under the surface, maybe old leaves or something worse. I backed away without looking too hard. There was a hallway that led deeper into the house. It felt darker there, like the light didn't want to follow me. The floorboards creaked louder with every step, echoing down the narrow space. I passed a small bathroom with a broken mirror and a toilet filled to the rim with dirt and debris. Plants had started growing inside it, thin pale stems reaching up toward the light. The first bedroom was empty except for a mattress on the floor. It was dark with mold, the shape of a body still pressed into it like it had never fully let go. The ceiling above it had a long crack, and every now and then a small piece of plaster would fall onto the mattress with a soft sound. The second bedroom was worse. There were clothes scattered everywhere, stiff and stuck together, shoes with no laces. A dresser pushed up against the door from the inside, like someone had tried to block it off. That stopped me for a moment. I stood there, listening. Still nothing. No movement, no sound that didn't belong to the house itself. I pushed the dresser aside slowly. It scraped across the floor, loud enough to make my chest tighten. Inside, the room smelled stronger, like old sweat and damp fabric. The walls were scratched in places, deep lines carved into the wood. I didn't touch them. I didn't want to know how old they were or how they got there. At the end of the hallway was a narrow staircase leading down. I hadn't noticed it at first because it was almost hidden behind a half-collapsed wall. The stairs were steep and uneven, and the air coming up from below was colder than anywhere else in the house. I stood at the top for a long time, listening, telling myself I could leave and still feel like I had explored enough. But I went down. Each step felt wrong. The wood was damp, and my flashlight beam bounced with every small movement. At the bottom was a basement, dug straight into the earth. The walls were stone, slick with moisture. The floor was dirt, uneven and packed down in places, like people had walked there a lot. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't old. They were clear in the dirt, leading from the back corner of the basement towards the stairs. They were human, adult size. My stomach dropped. I followed them with my light, my breathing shallow and fast. In the back corner was a small space blocked off by wooden boards, not nailed in place, just stacked there. I could see inside through the gaps. There were blankets, empty food cans, and plastic bottles. Someone had been living here, recently. The smell made sense now. I heard something above me, not a voice. Just the slow, careful sound of weight shifting on the floor upstairs. My body went cold all at once. I didn't think. I turned and moved as quietly as I could back towards the stairs. Every step felt too loud. The house creaked in response, like it was announcing me. Halfway up I heard another sound, our floorboard upstairs bending under weight, closer to the hallway. I ran. I didn't care about noise anymore. I took the stairs 2 at a time, burst into the hallway, and headed straight for the front door. Something moved in my peripheral vision, a shadow that didn't match the light. I didn't look. I didn't stop. The porch boards cracked under my feet as I jumped down into the leaves and mud. I slid, caught myself on a tree, and kept going. My lungs burned. Branches scratched my arms and face. I didn't stop until I saw my car through the trees. I unlocked it, got inside, and locked the doors again. I sat there shaking, watching the tree line. Nothing came out. The house stayed quiet, hidden, like it always had. I drove away without looking back. Later, when I was home and calm enough to think, everything fit together. The blocked room, the fresh footprints, the moved furniture. It wasn't abandoned. It was being used by someone who didn't want to be found. Someone who knew the house better than I ever could. The ending was clear to me. I didn't uncover a mystery or survive something supernatural. I walked into a place where I didn't belong, where someone else was already living in the dark, unseen. I was lucky they didn't want to be noticed as much as I didn't want to be there. I never went back. I never looked up the house again. Some places aren't empty. They're just quiet. And quiet can hide real people, real danger, and real enemies that don't need anything
Unreal to be terrifying. I went up there alone because that is how I always did things. The house sat on the side of a ridge in the Appalachians, far enough off the road that nobody would stumble on it by accident. The trees were thick and old, and the ground sloped so hard that every step felt like it wanted to slide me downhill. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold dirt, even though it was late summer. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. I parked my car behind a line of brush so it would not be seen and walked the rest of the way with my flashlight in my hand, not turned on yet. The house showed itself slowly through the trees. First the roof line, then a gray wall with peeling paint, then the porch sinking on one side like a bad tooth. It was bigger than I expected. 2 stories, maybe 3 if you counted the attic. The windows were dark holes, some with glass still in them, some broken and sharp. The porch rail was half gone, and the steps sagged in the middle, where years of rain had eaten at the wood. There was an old dirt driveway that ended in weeds. Tire tracks were still there, but they were not fresh. They looked like they had been pressed into the mud a long time ago and never washed away. I stood there for a minute and listened. No wind, no birds, just the faint sound of insects and my own breathing. I told myself the quiet was normal, but it did not feel normal. It felt heavy. I walked up onto the porch slowly, testing each board with my weight. Some of them bent and groaned, but none broke. The front door was closed, which surprised me. Most abandoned places I had been to had doors hanging open or gone completely. This one still had its door, gray and swollen from water. The knob was rusted, and when I turned it, it stuck for a second before giving way. Inside, the air was colder. It smelled like rot, mouse droppings, and something sour, like old fabric that had stayed wet too long. I stepped into a narrow entryway. The floor was covered in dirt tracked in over years, and there were dark stains I could not tell the cause of. My flashlight beam moved across the walls, showing old wallpaper curling off in strips. There was a staircase straight ahead, going up into darkness. To the left was a living room. To the right was what looked like a dining room. I went left first. The living room was mostly empty, but not fully. A couch frame set against the far wall, the cushions long gone. A coffee table was flipped on its side, one leg snapped clean off. There was a fireplace with soot still black on the bricks, and above it, a dark outline where a picture or mirror had once hung. The floor dipped in the center of the room, and I could feel it when I walked. Every step made a low creak, like the house was waking up one piece at a time. I noticed scratch marks on the wall near the fireplace. They were not deep, but there were many of them, running in different directions. They looked old. I shined my light closer and saw bits of wood still torn up around them. I did not know what made them, and I did not want to guess. I moved away and went back into the entryway. The dining room was worse. A long table still stood there, but it was bowed in the middle, and the chairs were tipped over or broken. One chair was upright, pulled away from the table like someone had just stood up and never come back. Dust was thick on everything, but in one spot on the floor near the chair, the dust was disturbed. It looked like footprints, but they were smeared and old, not clear enough to count toes or see a pattern. They led toward a doorway into the kitchen. The kitchen smelled the worst. Old cabinets lined the walls, their doors hanging open. The sink was full of black sludge that might have once been water. There were jars on the counter with rusted lids, some still sealed, others broken open. I did not touch anything. The floor here felt soft under my boots, like it could give way if I put too much weight down in one spot. I kept my steps light and stayed near the walls. There was a back door in the kitchen that led outside. It was chained shut from the inside. The chain was thick and rusted, looped tight around the handle and a hook in the wall. That stopped me for a moment. It did not make sense for an abandoned house. People usually chain doors to keep things out, not when they plan to leave forever. I shined my light on the chain and saw scratch marks on the door around it, deep ones this time, dug into the wood. The thought that came to me was ugly, and I pushed it away. I went back to the entryway and looked up the stairs. The steps were narrow and worn down in the middle. The banister was loose, and when I grabbed it, it shifted under my hand. I climbed slowly, listening to every sound. Halfway up, the temperature dropped again. I could see my breath in the beam of my flashlight, faint and thin.
Upstairs, there was a long hallway with doors on both sides. The ceiling sloped in places, and there were water stains everywhere. I opened the first door on the right. It was a bedroom. A bed frame sat in the corner, the mattress collapsed and black with mold. There were clothes scattered on the floor, old dresses and shoes, all ruined. The walls were covered in small holes, like something had been nailed up and taken down over and over again. The window was boarded from the inside, the boards nailed in place so tight that no light could get through. The next room was smaller, maybe a child's room. There was a small dresser tipped on its side, and a toy truck half buried in dirt on the floor. The ceiling here had caved in a little, and insulation hung down like dirty snow. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. At the end of the hall was a door that was closed. I hesitated there longer than anywhere else. The wood around the door frame was damaged, splintered like it had been kicked or forced. The door itself had deep grooves running down it, not straight, but curved and uneven. I opened it slowly. Inside was another bedroom, but this one was different. The bed was made. The blanket was old and faded, but it was pulled up neatly. On a small table next to the bed sat a glass of water, long dried out, with a white ring at the bottom. There was a chair in the corner with rope coiled on the seat. The window here was not boarded, but the glass was gone, leaving an open hole to the woods outside. The air coming in through it was icy. I backed out of that room and closed the door again. My hands were shaking now, and my mouth was dry. I told myself I had seen enough, but I still had not checked the attic. The pull-down ladder was in the hallway ceiling. I pushed it down, and dust rained over me, making me cough. The ladder felt weak, but it held. The attic was unfinished, just beams and insulation and old boxes. My light caught movement near the far end, and my heart jumped, but it was just a raccoon scrambling away through a hole in the roof. That made me feel worse, not better. Animals only lived where people did not want to be. One box near the ladder was open. Inside were papers, letters, and a notebook. I did not read everything, but I read enough. Dates from years ago, notes about keeping things locked, notes about noises at night, notes about someone not leaving.
The handwriting got worse as the pages went on, shakier and darker, like the person pressing the pen harder each time. He heard a sound downstairs then, a dull thump, followed by a slow creak. It was not wind. The air was still. I did not wait to hear it again. I climbed down the ladder too fast, my foot slipping on one rung, my knee slamming hard into the wood. Pain shot up my leg, but I stayed on my feet. I moved through the house quickly, not running, but close. The living room felt smaller now. The front door seemed farther away than before. When I reached it and pulled it open, the outside air hit me like freedom. I stepped onto the porch and did not stop until I was off it and halfway down the hill. Behind me, I heard another sound from the house. Not a voice, just the heavy slam of a door, deep inside. I did not look back. I got to my car, hands shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. When the engine finally started, I drove away with my headlights off until I reached the road. I did not call anyone. I did not post pictures. I did not go back. The house stayed up there on that ridge, hidden by trees, holding whatever truth it had swallowed. The clear ending for me was simple. Some places are empty of people but full of damage, and walking into that damage does not make you brave. It just puts you close enough to feel it. I left knowing that whatever happened in that house was real, human, and finished long ago, and that was worse than anything unreal could have been. I grew up close enough to the Appalachian foothills that the shape of them always felt familiar, like a line of old backs bent under time. When I was older and moved away, I missed that feeling, the heavy quiet, the way sound dies in the trees. That is why, when I came back for a few days in late October, I decided to explore a house I had heard about since I was a kid. It sat deep in the woods past a washed-out logging road, the kind of place adults warned you about without ever saying why. I parked my car at the edge of the gravel road where the ruts got too deep. The air smelled like wet leaves and rust. It had rained the night before, and the ground was soft, my boots sinking slightly with each step. The woods were thick with oak and poplar, their leaves brown and heavy, stuck together by moisture. Everything felt quiet in a way that made my ears ring. No wind, no birds, just the faint sound of water moving somewhere downhill. The path to the house was barely there anymore. I followed old tire marks filled with leaves, stepping over fallen branches and a length of rotted fence wire half swallowed by the dirt. After about 15 minutes, the trees thinned, and I saw it sitting in a small clearing like it had been dropped there and forgotten. The house was bigger than I expected. 2 stories, white paint gone gray and peeling, roof sagging in the middle like a tired mouth. One corner of the porch had collapsed, boards broken and angled into the dirt. Up close, the smell hit me first. Old wood, mold, animal waste, and something sour that reminded me of damp paper. The front door hung open, twisted on one hinge, tapping lightly against the frame when the breeze finally moved. Windows were broken or boarded with mismatched planks. I noticed scratches on the door frame, long and deep, like someone had dragged metal across it. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dark inside. The boards creaked under my weight, and I tested each step before committing to it. A rusted rocking chair sat tipped on its side, one runner snapped clean through. There were empty beer cans crushed flat near the wall, newer than the rest of the decay, their colors still bright. That made my stomach tighten. This place was not as empty as people like to think. Inside, the air was colder. The floor was covered in a layer of dust and dirt, thick enough to leave clear prints. The living room was wide, with a stone fireplace on one wall. The mantel had collapsed, stones scattered like teeth on the floor. Above it, a dark stain spread upward, the shape uneven and greasy from years of smoke or maybe something else. The ceiling bowed down, cracked and yellowed. I moved slowly, listening. Every sound I made felt too loud. My jacket brushed against a chair and made a soft rasp that sent a jolt through me. I saw a couch pressed against the far wall, springs exposed, stuffing spilled out like it had been clawed open. The curtains were still hanging, stiff with grime, moving slightly even though the windows were shut. The kitchen was through a doorway to the right. The floor dipped sharply in the middle, and I kept close to the wall. Cabinets hung open, doors torn off or dangling by one hinge. Plates and cups were smashed across the floor, mixed with mouse droppings and bits of glass. The sink was full of dark water, thick with leaves and dead insects. A calendar still hung beside the fridge, its pages curled and stuck together. The last month visible was October, years back, the days crossed off in a shaky hand. What made me uneasy was the order of some things. A stack of firewood sat neatly by the back door. A lantern rested on the counter, newer than everything else, its glass clean. Someone had been using this place at least sometimes. The thought followed me as I moved deeper into the house. A narrow hallway led to a bedroom and a bathroom on the first floor. The bedroom door was gone. Inside, a mattress lay directly on the floor, dark stains spreading across it. The smell was worse here, thick and sweet in a way that made my eyes water. Clothes were piled in the corner, men's by the look of them, heavy jackets and work pants. On the wall above the mattress, lines had been scratched into the paint, dozens of them, some deep enough to expose the wood underneath. I could not tell if they were marks to count time or just damage, but standing there made my chest feel tight. The bathroom was worse. The toilet was cracked, the bowl black with mold. The tub was full of leaves and dirt, like someone had shoveled the forest inside. There were muddy footprints on the tile, leading back toward the hallway. They were fresh enough that the edges were still clear. I considered leaving then. I should have, but the stairs caught my attention. They rose steeply at the end of the hall, dark and narrow. The railing was loose, and several steps were split down the middle. Something about not knowing what was up there bothered me more than staying on the first floor. I climbed slowly, placing my weight near the wall. Halfway up, I noticed a smell change. Less mold, more smoke and oil. At the top, the hallway was short, with 2 rooms and a door at the end that I guessed led to an attic space. The first room was empty, except for a broken dresser and a pile of blankets. They were arranged in a way that looked deliberate, folded and stacked, not just thrown there. There was a small window, and the light coming through showed dust floating thick in the air. The second room made my hands shake. It looked like a workshop. Tools hung on nails along the wall. Not old tools either. A saw, hammers, a coil of rope. On the floor were buckets and plastic containers, some with lids sealed tight. There was a strong chemical smell that burned my nose. I did not touch anything, but I did not need to. I knew enough to understand that this was not harmless. At the end of the hall, the attic door was open. A ladder was pulled down, its wood worn smooth by use. From below I could hear a faint drip, steady and slow. I stood there, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I thought about the beer cans outside, the fresh footprints, the clean lantern. Someone had been here recently. Maybe they were still close. I backed away quietly, each step careful.
When I reached the stairs, a floorboard creaked anyway, loud and sharp. I froze, listening. Nothing moved, but the silence felt heavier now, like it was waiting. I went down faster than I should have, gripping the railing, ignoring the way it shifted under my hand. Back in the living room, I noticed something I had missed before. Near the fireplace, a trap was set into the floor, hidden under a piece of plywood, dusted to match the rest. It was the kind meant for animals, heavy steel jaws open and ready. If I had stepped there earlier, it would have snapped shut on my leg. The realization made my knees weak. I did not run. Running felt wrong, like it would draw attention. He walked, steady and quiet, straight out the front door. The woods felt different now. Closer. Every sound seemed sharper. A branch cracked somewhere to my left, and I changed direction without thinking, moving downhill towards the sound of water I had heard earlier. I did not look back at the house. I kept walking until my legs burned and the trees thinned. When I reached my car, my hands shook so badly it took me a minute to get the keys in the door. I sat inside with the doors locked, breathing hard, watching the tree line. Nothing came out. No one followed. I drove straight to town and did not stop until I reached the sheriff's office. I told them where the house was and what I saw, careful and clear, leaving nothing out. They took it seriously. I could tell by the way their faces changed.
A few days later, I heard that they went out there with more people and found enough to shut the place down for good. I did not ask for details. I did not need them. Now, when I think about those mountains, I still love them, but I understand something I did not before. Not everything hidden in the woods is old or empty. Some places are still being used, still breathing, and they do not want to be found. I do not explore abandoned houses anymore. The quiet is not always harmless, and sometimes the scariest thing is knowing you are never alone at all. I parked my car at the end of a washed-out gravel road that barely deserved to be called a road anymore. The Appalachians wrapped around everything out there, hills stacked on hills, all of them dark green and heavy, like they were leaning in. The air smelled wet and old, like leaves that never fully dried. It was late afternoon, the kind where the light starts turning yellow and thin, and you can feel the day closing in even though the sun is still up. I had heard about the house from a faded map I found online, marked only as an old mining family place from the 1940s. No nama, no pictures, just a dot in the woods. I told myself I was just exploring, just looking, but my hands shook a little when I shut the car door. The sound echoed farther than it should have. Everything felt too quiet after that. The walk in took almost 20 minutes. The trail wasn't a real trail, just flattened weeds and broken branches, like something had passed through there again and again. The ground dipped and rose, soft in some places, hard and rocky in others. He had to step over rusted scraps of metal, half buried in the dirt. Old cans, pieces of wire, a bent license plate with no numbers left on it. I noticed trees with scars cut into them, old marks that had grown over, the bark warped and thick around them. It made my stomach feel tight. When I first saw the house, it didn't stand out right away. It blended in, like it had grown there. The wood was gray and cracked, the same color as the tree trunks around it. The roof sagged in the middle, and one corner dipped lower than the rest, like a shoulder that never healed right. The windows were dark holes. No glass, used empty frames. Vines crawled up the sides, thick and tangled, pulling at the boards. I stood there for a while before getting closer. The longer I looked, the more details came out. The front porch leaned forward, its posts bowed and splintered. A rocking chair sat on its side, half sunk into the dirt. The front door was still there, but hung open, moving slightly in the breeze, making a slow creaking sound that felt wrong every time it happened. I stepped onto the porch carefully. Each board complained under my weight, deep groans that felt louder than they should have been. Dust puffed up around my boots. The porch smelled like rot and mouse droppings. I could see claw marks along the doorframe, deep and rough, not small ones either. I tried not to think about what made them. Inside, the air changed right away. It was colder, heavier. The smell hit me hard. Old wood, mold, rust, and something sour underneath it all. The floor was covered in dirt and leaves, like the house had been breathing the forest in for years. My footsteps echoed in a dull way, like the sound was getting swallowed before it could travel. The living room was the first space I really saw. The ceiling sagged, with long cracks running across it. A chandelier hung crooked, missing most of its glass pieces. The walls were stained dark from water damage. There was a couch against one wall, the fabric shredded, stuffing spilling out like dried moss. Something had been nesting in it. I could see little bones scattered around, clean and white. I moved slowly, shining my flashlight into corners even though there was still daylight coming through the windows. Old habits kicked in. I noticed things I didn't expect. A pile of boots by the wall, mismatched, all adult-sized, caked in dried mud. A table with deep knife marks carved into the top, over and over in the same spot. Not random, focused. The kitchen was worse. The floor dipped so much that I had to test every step. Cabinets hung open, doors torn clean off some of them. Rusted pots were stacked in the sink like someone had meant to wash them and never did. There was a smell there that made my throat tighten. Not rot exactly. Something stale and human. The fridge stood open, empty except for a dark stain that had soaked into the metal and never left. I noticed then how quiet it really was. No birds, no insects. Even the wind felt muted inside those walls. My ears rang slightly, and I realized my breathing sounded too loud. I slowed it down without thinking. A narrow hallway led towards the back of the house. The wallpaper peeled off in long strips, revealing old newspaper underneath. Headlines about mine closures and strikes. Dates from decades ago. Some of the paper had newer writing scratched into it, words I couldn't fully read anymore, just deep grooves left behind. The first bedroom had a mattress on the floor, black with mold, and chains bolted into the wall near the head of it. They were thick, real chains, rusted but solid. My stomach dropped when I saw them. I didn't step any farther into that room. I didn't need to. The second bedroom was smaller. Children's clothes lay in a heap in the corner, stiff with age. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall. When I caught my reflection in it, distorted and stretched, I almost didn't recognize myself. I looked pale, eyes too wide. I lowered the flashlight for a second and let the dark settle, then turned it back on quickly, like I was afraid of what might fill the space if I didn't. At the end of the hallway was a door that led down, the basement. The door was newer than the rest of the house. Different wood, different hinges. That alone made my skin crawl. Someone had replaced it long after the house should have been empty. I stood there for a long time. My body wanted to leave. Every part of me felt tense, like a pulled wire. But curiosity pushed harder. I opened the door slowly. The stairs creaked but held. The basement smelled damp and sharp, like metal and wet stone. My flashlight beam caught shelves lining the walls. Jars sat on them, dozens of them. Most were empty. Some weren't. I didn't look too close. I didn't need to know exactly what was inside to understand it was wrong. The floor was packed dirt. Footprints crossed it, not old ones. Clear tread marks, recent enough that the edges hadn't softened yet. My heart started pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Someone had been here, not years ago, recently. In the far corner, I saw a sleeping area, a thin mattress, blankets, a pile of canned food. A hunting rifle leaned against the wall, clean and cared for. That was when the fear fully settled in. Not the fun kind, not the curious kind. The kind that makes your body feel heavy and slow. I heard something then, not a voice, not footsteps, just a shift of weight above me. A bolt creaking upstairs. Slow, careful. I didn't run. I wanted to, but I didn't. I turned off my flashlight and stood still, pressing myself into the shadow of the stairs. My ears strained for any sound. My legs felt weak, but they held. Another sound followed. A scrape. Something being moved. It wasn't loud, but it was close. Too close. I realized then that the house wasn't abandoned. It was just hidden. I waited. I don't know how long. Time felt thick and stretched. When the sounds moved farther away, towards the front of the house, I took my chance. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step placed with care. I slipped out the back door instead of going through the hallway again. The woods felt different when I broke through the brush. Brighter. Alive. I didn't stop moving until I could see my car through the trees. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice. When I finally got inside and locked the doors, I sat there breathing hard, staring at the tree line. I drove away without looking back. Later, after the adrenaline faded, the fear stayed. It settled deep. I reported the location when I got cell service, gave the details as clearly as I could. I don't know what came of it. I didn't go back. I won't. That house wasn't haunted. It didn't need to be. The worst things in those mountains were real, and they were still breathing. I went up there alone because that's how I always did things. I parked my car at the end of a washed-out gravel road that barely deserved to be called a road anymore. Weeds scraped the underside when I pulled in, and the trees leaned close on both sides like they were trying to block the way back out. The mountains were quiet in that heavy Appalachian way, where the quiet feels thick, like it's sitting on your shoulders. It was late afternoon, the sky dull and gray, the kind of light that makes everything look older than it is. The house sat halfway up a hill, hidden until you were almost on top of it. No driveway anymore, just two faint ruts through tall grass. The siding was gone in places, showing dark wood underneath that looked swollen and soft. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired back. One corner of the porch had collapsed, and the rest leaned forward at a bad angle. The windows were either broken or boarded up with warped planks. The boards were nailed from the inside, which I noticed right away, and that made my stomach tighten for reasons I couldn't explain yet. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. Wind moved through the trees. Somewhere downhill, water ran over rocks. There were no birds. That was the first thing that bothered me. I adjusted my backpack, checked my flashlight even though it wasn't dark yet, and walked up the hill slowly, watching where I stepped. Old glass and rusted metal hid under the grass. Up close, the house smelled wrong. Damp wood, rot, something sour underneath it all. The front door was still there, hanging crooked on one hinge. Someone had forced it open at some point, splitting the frame. I nudged it with my foot, and it swung inward with a long, low creak that echoed through the house. The sound carried deeper than it should have, like the place was hollowed out. Inside, the floor dipped under my weight. I stayed near the walls, stepping where the boards looked darker and thicker. Dust hung in the air, moving when I moved. The living room was mostly empty, except for an overturned couch with the stuffing ripped out. Mouse droppings covered the floor near the walls. A calendar still hung crooked near what used to be the doorway to the kitchen. The year on it was 1997. The pages underneath were gone, torn clean off. The walls were stained with long brown streaks where rain had gotten in. In one corner, the ceiling had collapsed, leaving a pile of wet insulation and broken boards. I could see straight up into the dark space between floors. Every sound I made came back to me louder. My breathing felt too sharp in my ears. I moved slowly from room to room. The kitchen sink was full of black water and dead bugs. The cabinets were open and empty, doors hanging loose. On the counter sat a single shoe, covered in dust, the laces still tied. That stopped me longer than anything else had so far. It didn't make sense. Everything else had been stripped or ruined, but the shoe looked like someone set it down and forgot to come back. I kept going, even though every instinct told me to turn around. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was narrow, and the floor there felt weaker. I used my flashlight now, even though daylight still leaked in through cracks and broken windows. The beam picked up scratch marks along the lower part of the walls, deep grooves in the wood, too wide to be from a small animal. The mattress was gone. Some of the marks overlapped, like whatever made them had paced back and forth. The first bedroom was empty, except for a metal bed frame rusted almost in half. The floor near the window was covered in feathers and dried droppings. Something had nested there at some point. I didn't stay long. The second bedroom was worse. The door was shut, which was strange since every other door had been left open. I pushed it gently. It resisted, then gave way with a soft scraping sound. Inside, the air felt heavier. The flashlight beam landed on the walls first. They were covered in stains and handprints, smeared and overlapping, some small, some adult-sized. I couldn't tell how old they were, but they were dark and greasy-looking, like oil mixed with dirt. In the corner sat a plastic bucket filled with old food cans and rags. The smell hit me then, sharp and sour, like sweat that had soaked into fabric for a long time. This room hadn't just been abandoned. Someone had stayed here, not long ago either. The boards over the window had been nailed from the inside, and a piece of cardboard was stuffed into the gap near the floor like someone had tried to block the cold.
I backed out of that room slowly, careful not to trip. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I told myself it was probably just a squatter, someone passing through, but that didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. People were unpredictable. The house felt smaller now, like it had closed in around me. I hadn't planned on going upstairs, but I noticed something near the end of the hall. A door I hadn't seen before, partly hidden behind a collapsed section of wall. It led to a narrow staircase going down, not up. A basement. The stairs were steep and uneven. I shined my light down and saw dirt at the bottom, not concrete. The smell changed as I descended. It was colder down there, damp and metallic. The walls were just stone stacked together, wet to the touch. The flashlight beam shook a little as my hands started to tremble. At the bottom, the basement opened into a wider space. Chains hung from the ceiling beams, rusted but thick, not decorative, practical. There was a workbench against one wall with old tools scattered across it. Some of them were newer than the rest, cleaned, used. A stack of empty water bottles sat nearby, along with a sleeping bag rolled tight. That was when I heard it. Not a voice, just movement. A slow drag of something heavy shifting deeper in the basement. It came from behind a pile of old furniture stacked against the far wall. He froze, light-locked in that direction. My breath caught halfway in. The movement stopped. The silence afterward felt worse than the sound had. He stood there, every muscle tight, listening. My ears rang. My mouth went dry. I knew then, without any doubt, that I wasn't alone. I didn't run right away. Fear made me slow and careful. I took one step back, then another, keeping the light steady. The stairs felt too far away. The beam of my flashlight shook enough that the shadows jumped across the walls. Something scraped again, closer this time. Not rushed, measured, like whoever or whatever it was knew I was there and wasn't in a hurry. That broke me. I turned and ran. He hit the stairs hard, hands scraping stone, boots slipping on damp dirt.
I didn't look back. The house above felt louder now, every board popping under my feet. I burst out through the front door and didn't stop until I reached my car. I fumbled the keys, dropped them, cursed under my breath as my hands shook too much to work right. When the engine finally started, I peeled out of there, gravel spraying, heart hammering. I didn't slow down until the road smoothed out and the trees pulled back from the edges. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone exactly where it was. He drove home in silence, hands still tight on the wheel. That night, I cleaned my boots twice, even though they didn't look dirty. I threw away the clothes I wore in that house. The next week, I went back during the day, but only to the edge of the road. The house was still there, quiet as ever, but there were fresh tire tracks in the grass now, leading up the hill. Not mine. I never went back up there again. I learned that some places aren't abandoned the way we like to think. Some of them are just being used by people who don't want to be seen. And sometimes, the scariest thing you can find in the mountains isn't something unreal or impossible. It's the proof that someone else was watching you the whole time, deciding what to do next. I drove up into the mountains alone on a gray afternoon when the clouds sat low and heavy, like they were tired of holding themselves up. The road narrowed the farther I went. Asphalt turned to broken patches, then gravel, then dirt with weeds growing through the middle. Trees leaned close on both sides, their branches clawing at the truck as I passed. The air felt colder up there, damp and sharp, and it smelled like wet leaves and old wood. I parked where the road finally gave up and turned into a rutted trail. From there I walked. I had heard about the house from an old map I found online, one of those scanned county records with faded ink and hand-drawn property lines. No name on it, just a square shape tucked deep in a hollow. Houses like that get forgotten when families move or die or just disappear. The mountains swallow things quietly. I followed a narrow path that might have once been a driveway. It dipped down into a shallow valley where the light dimmed even though it was still daytime. The trees grew thicker there, and vines wrapped around their trunks like ropes. The house showed itself slowly. First I saw the roof line through the branches, then a corner of gray wood. It was bigger than I expected. 2 stories, wide front porch sagging in the middle, roof bowed like a tired back. The windows were dark holes. No glass left, just jagged teeth along the frames. The paint had peeled off years ago, leaving bare wood that had turned the color of ash. It sat crooked, one side sunk deeper into the ground, like it was slowly melting into the earth. I stood there for a while before going closer. The place made the air feel still. No birds, no insects, nothing moving except the leaves shifting high above. The porch steps were half gone, so I stepped up carefully, testing each board with my boot. They groaned but held. The porch floor dipped under my weight and smelled like rot and mold. A rocking chair lay on its side near the wall, legs broken, seat split. Something had gnawed on it long ago. The front door was open just enough to see inside. It hung crooked on one hinge, swollen from years of rain. I pushed it wider and it scraped across the floor with a long, low sound that echoed inside the house. The smell hit me right away. Old damp wood, mouse droppings, mildew, and something sour underneath it all. I pulled my jacket tighter and stepped in. The front room was empty except for a fireplace against the far wall. The mantel had fallen forward, cracked clean in half. Ash and old bricks were scattered across the floor. The ceiling above it had a dark stain spreading out like a shadow where water had dripped for years. Light came in through the windows in pale strips, catching dust in the air. Every step I took stirred it up, making my nose itch. The floorboards creaked loudly, too loud for a place that felt so dead. I moved slow, careful not to put all my weight down at once. To my left was a doorway leading deeper into the house. The door itself was gone, just empty hinges and splintered wood. I passed what used to be a dining area. A table had collapsed in on itself, legs snapped. A single plate sat on the floor nearby, cracked but still holding together. It felt strange seeing something so normal left behind like that, as if someone had just stood up and never come back. The kitchen was worse. Cabinets hung open, their doors torn off or missing. Drawers were pulled out and dumped. The sink was rusted through, the pipes underneath eaten away. A fridge stood in the corner with the door open, inside black and crusted. I did not look long. The floor there was soft and spongy, dark with moisture. You could hear water dripping somewhere, slow and steady. I noticed marks on the walls as I moved through the rooms. Not decorations, just scratches and scuffs, some higher than they should be. The walls were bare in places where pictures might have hung, lighter squares showing through the grime. In one room there was a mattress on the floor, stained and torn, with blankets piled on top. That made my stomach tighten. This house was not as empty as I thought. I froze and listened. The dripping water was still there. The house itself made small sounds as it settled, wood popping, nails shifting. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing that told me someone was there right now. Still, the feeling stayed with me, thick and heavy in my chest. Someone had used this place not that long ago. The blankets looked newer than anything else in the house. There was a plastic bottle on the floor, crushed but clear, no dirt on it. I moved towards the back of the house, staying close to the walls. There was a narrow staircase leading up, its railing snapped off halfway. The steps were uneven, some missing chunks, some sagging badly. I tested the first one with my foot. It held. I went up slowly, counting each step, keeping my weight low. The air got warmer as I climbed, thicker and harder to breathe. Upstairs, the hallway was narrow and dark. The ceiling sloped down on both sides, making it feel cramped. Doors lined the walls, some closed, some open. The floor up there felt weaker, each step a gamble. I kept to the edges where the boards met the walls, hoping they were better supported. The first room I checked was empty, except for old clothes piled in the corner. They were dusty and stiff, eaten through in places. No smell of perfume or soap, just old fabric and mold. The window was boarded up from the inside with rough planks nailed across it. That did not feel right. This was not something done when the house was built. The nails were shiny, the wood lighter than the rest. The next room was smaller. There was a child's dresser tipped on its side, drawers spilled out. A single shoe lay under it, tiny and cracked with age. The walls were covered in pencil marks, lines and shapes that made no sense now. The ceiling above had caved in a little, letting in daylight through a hole filled with leaves. At the end of the hallway was a door that was shut tight. The wood around the frame was splintered, like it had been forced open and shut many times. I hesitated, my hand hovering near the knob.
I told myself I could leave. I had already seen enough. Still, my hand moved on its own. The knob was cold and sticky. I turned it slowly. The door opened into a room that felt different right away. The air was stale and heavy. There were shelves along the walls, lined with jars and cans. Some were empty, some full of dark liquid. A workbench sat in the middle, with tools scattered across it, all rusty but placed neatly. On the floor were muddy footprints, fresh enough that the edges were still sharp. They led from the door to a corner of the room and then stopped.
My heart started to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. I backed out slowly, pulling the door shut as quietly as I could. I did not run. I did not want to make noise. I moved back down the hallway, each step careful, my eyes fixed on the stairs. Halfway there, I noticed something else. A camera mounted high in the corner near the ceiling, small and black, lens pointed straight down the hall. A thin wire ran from it into the wall. That was enough. Whatever this place was now, it was not abandoned in the way I had thought. I went down the stairs faster than I should have, the steps groaning under me. I did not stop to look at anything else. I crossed the front room, shoved the door open, and stepped back onto the porch. The air outside felt like a relief, cold and sharp, filling my lungs. I did not feel safe until I reached the trees. Even then, I kept moving, not looking back, listening for sounds behind me. The path felt longer on the way out. The woods seemed tighter, darker. When I reached my truck, my hands were shaking so bad I had trouble unlocking the door. I sat there for a long time before driving away, engine running, doors locked, watching the tree line. Nothing moved. No one came out of the woods. Still, the feeling stayed with me all the way down the mountain. That house was not just a forgotten place falling apart on its own. Someone had claimed it, used it, watched it. I did not know for what, and I did not want to know. I never went back. Later, I reported the location anonymously, sending the map and the details to the county office. I do not know what they found or if they found anything at all. In the mountains, things like that can disappear again as easily as they show up. What I do know is that some places are empty for a reason, and some are only pretending to be.